Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
All right. Jessica, please.
Hi, Tom. Thanks,
Hi, Jessica.
for being here. I've got a question. It's about something that happened a long time ago, and I've got my own kind of intuitions about it, but there's not a definitive, oh, this is what that was or anything like that. So I'm always keen to ask all kinds of other opinions, just to broaden the picture on it, really. I don't think there will ever be a definitive answer, and it doesn't really matter. I'm just interested because it was quite an event. And I would be interested in your take on it based on your personal experience and according to MBT. So to cut, well, it's a bit of a story, but not too much. I'll be precise with it. I was living in London. I've lived in London a lot of my life, and I'm in and out of London all the time now. I've just got back today. But I was in a Victorian house which had been turned into flats, as a lot of them have been over the years. And I was in my late 20s at the time, and my partner at the time owned this particular house. And we lived in one of the flats, and there was another flat downstairs that had a young girl in it. And she was on benefits, but she wasn't paying the rents, and she was supposed to, but she didn't pay anything. And it went on, and then it got quite serious because she was accusing my ex of doing things that were quite unacceptable, and that it was going to go to court, and it was getting really serious because she was being taken seriously. And he was an international opera singer, so she knew that she could hit him hard. And at the same time, and she was telling her family the same kind of story, but we never saw her family or anything like that. He was away most of the time because he was traveling. But at the same time, in the flat that I was in, I came in, and for several weeks there was a presence there, and it was a very definite presence there. It wasn't a bad one, and I wasn't concerned about it, but I used to communicate with it, and I used to call him Fred. It was quite obviously male. And every day when I'd go in, when I'd been out and about, I'd come back and I'd say, oh, hiya, Fred. And I could feel this like, oh, you're in, you know, it's almost like, come in, please. And I used to bring him back flowers and plants and stuff like that. And we'd just chat. And he was allowed everywhere, but he wasn't allowed in my bedroom. And one particular day I was in the bedroom, and I just felt creepy about that. To me, it was a matter of privacy. I don't mind a presence being there. I didn't want it in my bedroom. But anyway, and because I had a lot of out-of-body experiences, and I have done most of my life, I really didn't want that somebody interfering, you know, or being nosy. And anyway, the door opened, very definitely opened, and he did used to move things around. And I don't think this was coming from me, although I did consider it. Of course, I could make these happen myself. The door opened, and I said, Fred, you're not to come in the bedroom. And then the door shut, properly closed. It didn't just blow open a little bit and close a little bit. So we had this understanding, and that was, I told him, if you come in the bedroom, you can't be around me anymore. And anyway, I kept referring to him as Fred. And one day I was telling my ex about it, my partner at the time, you know, and I was saying that, you know, I've got this Fred that's around the place. And I said, I don't know what his name is. I'll just call him Fred. And this particular day, I said, oh, you're right, Fred. And I said, what is your name? And I suddenly heard Stan. And I said, oh, Stan, your name's Stan. So I got talking to him as Stan. Well, when my partner came home that day, I said, I found out his name. I said, it's Stan. And he said, oh, God. He said, yes, it is. The guy that used to be in the flat below where this young girl was a gentleman called Stan, and he committed suicide. I didn't know this, and he only knew because his sister came over from Ireland to see where her brother had lived before he'd gone. And she said, yeah, his name's Stan, and I just want to see where he lived. So as we were talking, suddenly all the lights just went off, on, off, on. Mm. And then they went down really low and stayed there, but not quite off. So we looked out to see if it was the same everywhere else, because you can get power cuts like that, but it was just in this house, in this particular room, as far as we were aware. And I said, well, we both realized that must be Stan telling us something, because we'd been talking about the problem with this girl and how serious it was going to get. And even though probably nothing would have come of it, just the slur would have been enough to destroy a reputation. So anyway, I said, oh, it must be Stan. And as that, the lights just went off and back on again, almost like Morse code. So my partner at the time says, I think he wants us to go downstairs to the flat. And she was away at the time, and it just went off and on again. So we went downstairs. And on the side in the hallway there, just outside her flat, was a letter. And it was from her mother. It was opened. So we had a look. And it was from her mother, and it had her mother's address on it, which is just a couple of streets away in the East End of London. So we went round there and we paid a visit. And her parents, she had a mother and stepfather, were horrified when they found out the truth of what was going on. And within a couple of days, they apologized profusely anyway. And within a couple of days, they came round, cleared everything out, and just moved her out of there and settled up and made sure that she didn't go ahead with anything. So my question with that was, what was that entity? Because I don't think it was all coming from me, because how would I know that his name was Stan and that he was such a lonely person when I knew nothing about that beforehand? And I definitely heard Stan. I didn't, that one didn't come from me at all. And it solved a potentially very serious problem that was coming up. And he left after that. Well, that entity left after that. I said thank you, and I left some flowers out and everything. And that kind of was the end of it. So I'm interested from your experience, or from an MBT point of view, what that was about.
Okay, well, I would have an opinion on that, and that is that was the larger consciousness system wanted to help you and your partner deal with this problem, because that would have been a high entropy thing in your life, would have pushed you away from your path of growth, and you were a person of interest. I don't know, maybe he was too. He seemed to be also very intuitive. So intuitive people who are trying to do the right thing and grow up, they're persons of interest to the larger conscious system, because it wants to help that process. Okay, so Stan came around just for the reason to build up some confidence in you, in Fred. Was it Fred?
Well, I called him Fred because I didn't know what his name was. I knew someone there or something there.
Well, that was just to build confidence in this entity. So you had this entity around. If you just that evening when the lights went up and down, if suddenly that was Stan's or Fred's first appearance, you wouldn't have had a whole lot you would have reacted very differently. So Fred had to show up first and interact with you until you got some confidence about, yes, this is a real entity. It is information. This is something that is significant and real. Okay, and then you found a name was Stan, and then that was handed to you just as the time when your significant other could relate to Stan being a useful thing, right? And then the lights go on and off just at the time when there happens to be an envelope downstairs with the mother's address on it, which wasn't far away.
Electricity meters were downstairs, which is why we were down there.
Right. So see, all of this, it's all obviously looks to me like a setup. And no doubt the system had also been nudging her mother to kind of find out what she was doing, where she was, and see if she needed help and rein her in if she was off, creating a mess like she probably had. It was probably her reputation. She probably went out and, didn't pay rent and didn't do other things. And mom probably had to keep pulling her back up off the street now and again. And she was probably worried about her daughter. So the system probably also was talking to her and saying, daughter's gotten a little out there now. She's getting more and more frantic and more dysfunctional. She needs you. She needs some change to help her. So mom was already probably geared up to that, to deal with that situation when you walked in. It wasn't like she had to first verify, who you were and what the hell you had to say about her daughter or any of that. She already was programmed with that feeling. So that just went like that. So the letter just happened to be there, and it just happened to be laying open, So there's a whole bunch of just happened to be's that all fell in perfect timing to help you get through this problem.
Well, it was very odd as well, because her mother only lived 2 streets away, and why write a letter with your address at the top of it? I mean, she must know her mother's address.
Yeah, exactly. So that happens because the system nudged her to do that. So anyway, the whole thing, I would say, was the system trying to help you continue your path of learning and growing, to help this girl who obviously was at her wit's end and self-destructing in the apartment down below. And she wasn't going to be getting better. She was going to continue to sink, and she needed some help. And the mom probably was worried about her daughter. So it wasn't just you, but the system looked at the whole thing and says, we could do something here that would help everybody out. And because you were intuitive enough that you would listen, you see, that's because you already were a person of interest who had a connection with the system. And then that connection was made even firmer with the appearance of Fred. That gave you something more substantial. So it's just the way the system works. Everybody won. Everybody got, something that they needed, that they were looking for. And basically a person of interest got helped over a hard spot. A girl got helped out of a hard spot, and a mother got helped out of a hard spot. So
yeah, funny. It's absolutely right, because the girl was then in a position she didn't know what to do or say, because her mother was really angry with her and shocked. And she said sorry to me, and the girl did. But I gave the girl a hug, and I said, I know you didn't mean it. And she needed a way out, and I gave her a hug, and she gave me a hug, and she said, look, I'm sorry, and let's just be friends. And it was, and her mother said afterwards, I was gobsmacked that I thought you'd want to kill her after what she'd put you through. And I said, but it wouldn't solve anything. It was much more positive for everyone to leave it like that, because then you don't have to feel badly either, It's done.
And you may have gotten a little nudge right at that moment to go give her that hug.
Yeah.
And to be that forgiving, as you were standing there thinking, should I slap her or should I hug her?
Oh, I talked about punching her before that. Don't worry about that.
So you probably
a few nudges to punch.
You probably got a nudge to just give her a hug and let it go.
Yeah, she was only 18. I didn't want to see her just beaten down, because there's just no
exactly point. So see, everybody wins. Everybody wins. Everybody's entropy is a little lower than it would have been if just you let things ride. Yeah. And the system was really aware of it because it was aware of what you were doing, because you were a seeker, growing and connecting. So if you're a seeker, those kinds of things happen to you in life. You have these strange things.
But that was just laughable, though. And the lights going down was like, it was Morse code. You think, it's like...
it's just the lights. Yeah, the lights going up and down. The system doesn't have to affect the electricity in your room. It's just the data you get. There is no room. there is no electricity.
Exactly.
You're in a virtual reality. It's trivial for the system to make your lights blink on and off or go down and stay dim or, whatever.
It was almost funny. We're saying, is that you then, Stan? It's going, yeah.
Yeah. And
do we go downstairs? Yes. And down it went. It was crazy.
Yeah. So that's what was going on. And yes, I've had similar experiences. And I think a lot of people who have been seekers for long periods of time will realize, their life is like that. There's just a lot of things that just fall into place when they need to. A lot of terrible problems that dissolve at the last moment because you're dealing with them in the right way. Yeah. Now, had you gotten really, really angry and upset and kind of lost your center and did all that because of it, it might not have happened that way. Now, you may have had a lesson to deal with all that stuff just to help you get over that much ego. But because
I thought that I was the one causing the problems because she was telling her mother it was me. What do you mean it's me? So it was so frustrating.
Yeah. Well, and anyway, it all worked out well for everybody. So
yeah, that was really interesting.
That would be my opinion. It just was the system helping out.
Thank you. I didn't realize it would be that obvious or that
oh yeah.
Just do stuff that was just so ridiculous. It was almost laughable, why not just...
But it worked, didn't it?
Wrote the letter in front of my face.
Yeah, right. It'll do whatever works.
Well, that certainly did. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Michelle.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
Before I learned of MBT, I've come across a number of teachings. And there is these concepts of chakras that is present in many of these teachings. Mm-hmm. At least to me, they seem important because they are very present in the other teachings. But they are always present in an intuitive language that limits the way that I can understand and try to make use of what they are trying to pass down. So my question is there an interpretation for chakras in MBT that would be more appealing or helpful to left brain people?
Yes, perhaps so. Chakras are not fundamental. Chakras are tools that people make up in order to be able to teach other people, in order to be able to understand themselves. What we do when we have an understanding that is very abstract is that we tend to break it up into pieces, make those pieces more concrete, and then we can deal with it better that way. Humans don't work well in very abstract situations. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to proceed. So it just developed in that theology. Hindu theology, I believe, was there first. It developed in that theology that there were these centers, chakras, 7 of them. I mean, each one kind of had a different aspect of being and personality. So it covers all the aspects. So we take the being and the personality, the spiritual being, and we break it up into pieces. And now we make these pieces seem more physical, more concrete. Oh, this one is, at the belly button, and this one's at your throat, and this one's at the top of your head. And we fasten them to the body, which then makes them more physical, something we can focus on, something we can think about. And we give them attributes. And of course, it works perfectly. It's a good tool set. It's a good way of taking something very complex and very abstract and breaking it down into something that's usable for a more average person. So that's what they are. They're tools. They'll help you fix your intent on what it is you want to do. So if you are doing something, let's say, that has to do with the heart, well, then there's a heart chakra, or maybe the root chakra. and this has certain properties and certain things it kinds of governs and influences. And if that's where your issues are, then you can work on that. And by developing that chakra and making it open and blossom and grow and give it energy, then you're evolving. So it's just a way of getting you to focus on where you're going, on your evolution, on your growing up, on your understanding of things. And it's giving you a picture and a pattern and a prescription, a rule set. First do this, then do that. Here's how you open them. And they open like this. And the more data you have about it, then the easier it is for you to visualize that function happening, which means it's easier for you to help develop that function because you're visualizing it happening. You see, it's like people healing with energy bar tools, tools of white light that go turn black spots white, on somebody's health aura. There is no light. There is no, there are no black spots, but it's a tool set that allows people to focus their intent on making somebody else more healthy and getting rid of a particular illness. So the whole thing about tools is they help us focus our intent. The focused intent is the only real ingredient. That's what really changes things. All the rest are tool sets. So that would be the MBT view of the chakras, a very valuable tool set, just like energy bar tools are a very valuable tool set for healers. That's the way light workers work. They put white light to burn away black spots. It's all metaphorical. But if you don't have those, if you don't break it down into pieces and you don't make up those tools and leave it all in an abstract space, people can't work with it. They don't know what do I do next? Oh, you just be one. Be one with all that is. That's it. Most people can't deal with that. They don't know how to be one with all that is. But if they've got 7 chakras and a whole lot of things that they can do to develop, they can do that. You see, so it's a tool set. It was created by people to help people. It was probably created, the very first person that created it maybe even got it from the larger consciousness system as a good tool set for helping himself and for others. Right? If people are going to grow up, then the system is going to help hand them tools that are going to help them grow up. So they may have gotten that in a meditation state. Well, that just means the system says, hey, here's a handy tool set you can use. It'll help you grow up. So
it's correct to say that chakras don't have existence like IUOC.
No, they're not fundamental. There's nothing fundamental about them.
Okay.
Which is true about almost everything in our in our reality. Like the little boy in the Matrix said, there is no spoon. The spoon is not fundamental. It's an image. It's a virtual spoon. It's created out of information. So it's like that. The only thing that's really fundamental is consciousness. And the thing that interacts and affects consciousness is another conscious intent. And that's the active ingredient. Everything else are tool sets that help us do that, help us focus our intent on what it is we want to do and how we want to develop and how we go about it. But now if you came to a Hindu and said, oh, all those chakras, that's just all, belief and it's just a tool set and they're not real, they would probably disagree with you very adamantly because in their belief system, those are real things. Well, of course they're real. I can see them. Well, I can see them too. That doesn't mean they're real. What I see is data. It's a data stream is what I see. And if that is my metaphor, let's say for a health body is something with black spots in it, if that's my metaphor, that's what I'll see. And if my metaphor for slicing and dicing spirituality into 7 different categories is chakras, well, that's what I'll see. So I can look at somebody, and if I want the look of it, if I say I want the output to be in terms of the development of their chakras, then I can see a person and I can see this chakra and that chakra and look at all the development in their chakras, and I can get that. Or I could say I want to see it in terms of color. If they're very spiritual, I want a light purple color to come up around their head. And if they're very intelligent, I want a yellow color to come up around here. And if they're very self-centered, I want to see this gray swath run across this way. And that's what I'll see. So what you see doesn't mean that there's anything behind it. What you see is information. And yes, you can see chakras. I can see a colored egg around somebody and say that's their aura. But all it is information, and the colored egg is just my output format for the information. Same with chakras. So excellent tools, but nothing fundamental.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jane.
Hi, I have a question regarding the Free Will Awareness Unit and the IUOC. When we die, when the avatar dies or the elf dies and gets reabsorbed with its IUOC. So I guess first my question is it true that initially, just like the larger consciousness system broke itself off into pieces of IUOCs, IUOC, that then each IUOC breaks itself off into many pieces of different free will awareness units. Is that correct? It's not just one free will awareness unit for one IUOC. Is that correct?
No, it's mostly just one for one, mostly. It can make more than that, but typically, you can see you send the individuated unit of consciousness sends that free will awareness unit to log on and make choices for someone. And the whole point is to learn through those choices. Well, learning is cumulative. If you send 10 people out all to learn and you're at the same level, all of them start at the same level, well, they'll all probably get about the same amount. And you could have gotten that just with one of them. But now after that one has learned some, now you start at a little higher point. Now you send out another one that starts at a little higher point and it'll learn some. So you work your way up, but it's a cumulative process.
And then that free will awareness unit gets reabsorbed into the same IUOC that it came from.
Yes.
And when it goes back to an avatar, it has a new, hopefully evolved quality of consciousness.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that really answers my question because I've been struggling for months with, I thought for some reason that, MBT is a very long book and I couldn't read it all. I didn't feel like I could read it all over again to find the right page where I thought that the IUOC broke off into many pieces. So I thought, well, when you get reabsorbed into it, how does it know which quality of consciousness, know what I mean, to bring back to,
Right. That's why it does mostly one at a time. Now, there are some cases, but they're in the margins. It doesn't happen often, where it might have two that it sends down, but it's mostly because those two are going to interact with each other in a way that between the two of them, they're both going to learn more. In other words, let's say if somebody had a terrible time in a mother-daughter relationship, and they just had a real difficult time in that mother-daughter relationship, well, they've been a mother and they've been a daughter, but that doesn't quite fix it. So next time they come down, they're both the mother and the daughter, both from the same IUOC. They're playing both roles at the same time. You see, now you have a situation where learning is more likely to take place because they're connected in both ends. Instead of pointing a finger, they're the problem. It's hard because the finger's pointing at yourself. So the system can do things like that occasionally, more than one, just for a special purpose, but it's not typical. The typical thing is an IUOC produces one free will awareness unit at a time, and it incarnates, it comes back, it produces another free will awareness unit, incarnates someplace else, and it comes back because, learning, again, it's cumulative. It's not serial. It's not like you can send 10 children, to second grade and, they all come back knowing just about as much as you learn in second grade. It's not like all 10 of them will get you to the 10th grade. It doesn't work that way.
Well, it's funny because I can sense different reactions in myself. Like one of them is actually more of the ego reaction where I'm thinking I'm really glad I don't have to share my IUOC. Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, Toby, please go ahead.
All right, this one is, I think, quick. There was an event where, among questions that were allowed, you specifically mentioned, how do you know you're not making all this stuff up? So I thought I would go ahead and take the bait.
Well, good. That is a good question. How do you know you're not making all this stuff up? That's a question I've asked myself, millions of times. And particularly, I did when I was first learning this stuff, when I was first out at Bob and Rose. And Dennis and I both constantly asked ourselves that exact question. How do you know you're not making this stuff up? Well, it takes a lot of experience before you get to that point that you're not making it up. It just takes a lot of experience. I spent probably 2 years or so with Bob and Ro, going out of body, whenever I wanted to, and doing things and coming up with data and healing and remote viewing and reading numbers off of blackboards. And the statistics were probably like 100,000 to 1 that I was just a good guesser, at guessing, 8-digit numbers on blackboards. I just was a really good guesser. So the statistics said that something real was happening here, but that wasn't enough. I didn't get that down at the core level of my gut. I got that at the intellectual level, but at the core level, I'm still thinking, yeah, but maybe there's just, something else going on that I'm not understanding. That I'm making, I'm creating a lot of this. Until Dennis and I went out together on an out of body and interacted together, and I got the evidence of that later. And that after that, I didn't ask anymore, is this real or am I just making it up? Because that was kind of the final straw where there was absolutely no way that I could imagine that could happen in any other way other than that it happened. There really wasn't any other answer. You can say, well, I healed somebody. Okay, this person had a degenerative disease. They'd had it for 10 years, and I worked on them. And within a week, the disease mostly went away. Well, I feel like, okay, I probably did that. But, things like that happen. People just get better for no particular reason. So you don't know for sure that you really made that happen. Now, remote viewing and reading numbers and things, they're a little more precise. But still, because you don't get it right every time, you get it right like most of the time, but not every time. So what's the difference? If I can read numbers, why don't I get it right every time? Those sorts of things kind of keeps you wondering. But with enough experience, like experience that we just heard about, that, the larger conscious system, and, along comes, Ralph, and then he turns his different name and the lights go on and off. And when you've had enough of those kinds of experiences, eventually you get to the point to say, it's real. And you just get to the point you stop asking anymore because it doesn't matter, really. It is. It just is the way it is, and you're living it, and you're working with it, and it seems to be working in your life, and that's enough. So, you give up the idea of, is it real? And once I found out that reality was information, then that solved the problem much better, because there's nothing more real than information. So I'm getting information. That information comes from somewhere. Now, I could make up the information because I'm a consciousness and I can create information, but I know when things happen that are outside of my creation. Just like Jessica knew that she wasn't making the lights go on and off, and she wasn't imagining Fred, and she didn't, make an envelope show up at the door, those kinds of things. She knows that that's all happening outside of her. And when you know it's outside of her, then information is the only thing that's real. Then this is outside information because it's not stuff that you could come up with or control or do. And then that gives you confidence that it is real. So if you do this stuff like I did very seriously, out with Monroe, I'm spending 15, 20 hours, a week at it. It took me a couple of years to get to that point. It isn't, if I was doing it casually, it may have taken me a decade or more to get to that point. So it takes a while before you're going to get there to where you realize that, is it real is a bad question. It's not the right question. The question is it useful? Are you learning? Are you growing? Is this on your path toward growing up? And that's enough. If it's that, it doesn't matter whether it's somebody's definition of real or not real. It's information. Even if the information is coming from yourself and you're growing up because of it, that's good. That's what counts. And if the information's coming from outside of you and you're not growing up with it, well, that's not helpful. That's useless. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's information. If it helps you grow up, it's good. And is it real or not becomes a non-question.
All right, great. Then I will assume that the way I keep turning up with the exact information random people need is
Yes, it's real, Toby.
perfect. Thank you so much for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, thanks for showing up today. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you? Hi,
Good.
Tom. How are
Oh,
you?
Patrick.
So, my question actually relates a lot, it turns out, to this discussion we're having. It started with Greg and with Marla. I've long been flummoxed by the concept of how our consciousnesses interact with our avatars and how the avatar can have an impact on how you perceive reality and how your consciousness seems to act. For instance, whether it be chemicals such as a sedative that can alter your state of consciousness, or a physical injury, or a thing like a brain tumor. We know that there are distinct physical things that we perceive that can alter our consciousness. And I've been trying to resolve that difference with the fact that consciousness is primary. Everything else is in the data and in the data stream. The only thing that is real is data, but also in the system that we're in, the constraints themselves and the rule set is also real. So that when when our consciousness is interfacing with a particular avatar, the rule set and the constraints that are associated with that avatar will affect our conscious experience in the system. And so I've been trying to resolve how that relates to the fact that we would consider that combination to be the free will awareness unit, which then ties back to the IUOC. And I've been thinking about this actually for a couple of weeks, and then it dawned upon me that is it possible that the consciousness that we experience while we're essentially plugged into the system, in fact, is kind of a hybrid subset. For instance, the free will awareness unit has, since there is the interplay between the constraints and the rule set and how it impacts consciousness, is the unit that we are essentially right now really a hybrid of the particular constraints and rule set that we're operating under, plus our free will awareness unit. Does that make sense?
Yes. So let me answer that maybe a little indirectly, but I think I'll get to the conclusion you're looking for. And that is, we have to be careful to not think that the rule set modifies our consciousness. All right, we have a brain tumor. And we say the brain tumor is because of the rule set. And then we have different consciousness because of that brain tumor. We're angry or we're happy or we're comatose or whatever. And that changes our consciousness. It doesn't change our consciousness. It doesn't do anything at all to our consciousness. What it does is it limits. It doesn't change it, but it limits our consciousness. Our consciousness is still the same consciousness it always was, but now it's limited. It's playing an avatar that has limitations. So, a good example of that is when your elf, falls off a cliff and hits bottom. Well, one of the rules in the rule set in that virtual reality is gravity. Otherwise, your elf wouldn't fall. He'd float. So gravity is a rule. And when it hits bottom, well, then it gets hurt. The elf now, has just lost hit points is how these things are done in the game. Well, it's not that you, the player, are somehow different, that you, the player, have lost something that you had before. The player is still the same player with all the same capabilities, but now he has to play an elf that's damaged, that has lower hit points, that has a broken leg or whatever. So what happens is that the rule set constrains the consciousness to play an avatar that is limited now. So let's say the brain tumor makes the person slur their words and they can't speak. They can't speak because the tumor is there at the speech center of the brain and it's pushing on that speech center that doesn't function well anymore. So the words get slurred. Well, now the consciousness doesn't have a problem other than it has to work with an avatar that can't speak, that slurs its words. So now the consciousness communicating to some other avatar with that avatar finds that his avatar doesn't speak well anymore, and he has to deal with that constraint. So it's not that the consciousness itself is affected, but the appearance of the consciousness to other avatars. So if you're another avatar and you see this person and you know them and now they're slurring their words, you think that their consciousness, has been somehow degraded. But it's only their consciousness is really the same as far as the consciousness being the free will awareness unit or the IUOC. The IUOC didn't get degraded. The free will awareness unit didn't get degraded, but the ability of that free will awareness unit to function through that avatar got degraded by the rule set. So that's, if we're careful to think about it like that, then that may clear up your problem. It's really not consciousness at stake. Somebody gets Alzheimer's, it doesn't mean that the consciousness is confused. It just means the consciousness has an avatar that, can't remember and doesn't know where it is and doesn't know who it is. And that's just a limitation by the rule set on that consciousness. If you have an avatar that has very short fingers, and that avatar wants to be a concert pianist, well, there's limitations there, and the consciousness is going to have to work with those limitations. So all sorts of things like that. You're born with one foot an inch longer than the other. Well, the consciousness has to work with a avatar that has that issue. So all avatars have different constraints, and those constraints are set by the rule set, which is pretty much deterministic as far as the rule set goes. It's got some randomness in it, obviously, a lot of randomness in it, but it's mostly pretty deterministic. So when that rule set says this brain can't think anymore, and you're the free will awareness unit, well, you just can't get that avatar to play chess anymore and win.
Okay, so then in other words, we're always, as free will awareness units, we're always working with a subset of capabilities and capacities that are determined by our particular constraints, set of constraints associated with the avatar.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. And we can do things to raise those constraints and lower those constraints. You know, and that's sort of when I was talking before about if you're a very negative person, then you're going to repress serotonin production to mirror that negativity. See, so those two things work. And now if you're not, you know, you want to get out of that and be a happy person again, well, now you're also going to have to be happy long enough to get that serotonin production back up. And this is a physical electrochemical body. That may take you some months to do that. It's not just, it doesn't just turn on a dime, because you've got this rule set that you've got to deal with, which is not fast and not necessarily steady. So yes, you're right. Each free will awareness unit deals with the constraints of the avatar that it has to work with, and those constraints can grow or shrink as a function of a lot of things, a function of accidents, you know, a function of attitudes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Our last question for today is from Alona. Please go ahead, Alona.
So my question is about Bermuda Triangle, and I'd like to understand why LCS would break its own rules.
Why do you think it breaks its own rules?
Well, yes, because people and things just disappear, which they don't do in the kind of, yeah.
Well, the system, you know, well, people would probably argue whether or not the Bermuda Triangle has, you know, mysterious properties, but there's a pretty good set of data that says odd things often seem to happen there, a lot more than odd things happen other places. So why would the system do that? The system will do things that help the rest of us wake up and see the world as a more complex and a bigger picture than just the physical. But now if it does something like a whole, you know, bunch of people disappear, well, the consciousness system isn't likely to do that. A whole bunch of people disappear. That'd be pretty drastic. You know, it's taking a whole bunch of people out of the simulation to make a point about the world being more you know, grander than just the physical. So that sort of thing, I would say I don't know whether those things have actually happened or not. But the fact that people get there and their compasses spin around in circles and they don't seem to have any sense of direction, and other strange things happen as they fly through that space, even not just being on the ground, that would just be one of those spaces where the system would, you know, would help educate us. People would do it. People would report it. They'd write books about it. Other people would read them, and the other people would say, wow, yeah, this reality is a little squirrely. It's got all kinds of different things in it. It's not just this physical world, and that's a good thing. So that's about as much as I could say about that, but I can't imagine the system, you know, ending the lives of a whole ship full of people that just disappears with, you know, 100 people on it. That would be too drastic. I don't think the system would do anything like that. But spinning compasses around, turning people around, make them head east and then end up west, things like that, sure. It plays tricks like that just to get people's attention. You know, crop circles, you know, very, very complex patterns end up on the ground overnight with no noise and no light. Well, what's that all about? Well, it's the same thing. It's just something that wakes us up to our reality being more than just a physical reality, because nobody can imagine how that physically could have happened in one night. You know, a pattern that would probably take a team of surveyors, you know, 3 months to lay out. You know, not only straight lines, but curves and angles and very complex things that are even hard for surveyors to do. And yet they're done with precision. in one day, at nighttime. So the system does do things like that just to nudge us into seeing reality as something bigger than just the physical.
So in your view, it's then not the glitch in the matrix?
No, I don't think it's a glitch in the matrix. No, I think it's purposeful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for being donors and supporters of MBT and Pamela and I and the work that we do. This has been a very trying year. This past year has been a very trying year for a lot of people. And I think the majority of us have probably found that, our finances and other things are a lot more problematic this year than they have been in the past. And we're feeling that same kind of pinch. It's just the way things work out. This is that time that everybody's going to hurt a little bit. And we're just like everybody else. We found that we had a whole lot of money out there that just disappeared. And that's life, in 2020. So you just kind of lump it and go on. So if that's the reason for our change of heart suddenly, that we are so interested in Patreon and so interested in people, giving donations, is that we need it just to keep going. That's life, right? And I'm sure all of you are the same way. It's hardly anybody that's not been affected by this. So I even doubly appreciate the fact that in these hard times, you're still willing to share some of what you have with us. That's amazing, and we appreciate it very much that you've done that. So thank you so very much, and I've had a lot of fun doing this. We'll have to do it again. Been a lot of fun. Thank you all for coming.
This was a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah,
Thanks,
see
everyone.
everybody.
Jamie. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Lots
Happy
of
holidays,
love.
everyone.
So long.
So long.
Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.